What if I told you a tiny mountain kingdom once forced both France and Spain to their knees? The Kingdom of Navarre, Europe's last surviving Basque realm, defied superpowers for centuries with its strategic marriages, mountain fortresses, and unbreakable spirit. But in 1512, something shocking happened. Why was this ancient kingdom brutally divided? And does its legacy still threaten Spain today? This is Navarre's forgotten story. Whispers of the Mountains, the birth of Navarre. In the shadowed valleys of the western Pyrenees, where the wind still speaks the language of the ancients, the Kingdom of Navarre was born, not in fire and conquest, but in quiet resilience. Here, the Vascons carved their lives into the earth long before Rome ever dreamed of empire, speaking the raw, untamed tongue of Proto-Basque. When the Romans came, they didn't crush these people. They bargained with them, built cities atop their towns, and watched as Latin mingled with Basque like mountain rivers merging in spring. As empires crumbled and new powers rose, Visigoths, Moors, Franks, the people of Pamplona walked the line between submission and sovereignty, holding tightly to their identity beneath shifting flags. With Merovingian dukes on one side and Muslim garrisons on the other, they didn't just survive. They endured, planting the seeds of a kingdom where mystery, blood, and stubborn pride would one day give rise to Navarre. Shadows at Roncesvalles. Navarre between empires. The land that would one day be Navarre became a storm-tossed frontier, caught between titanic powers, Frankish ambition and Cordoban might. As the Carolingians broke the old duchies and carved the land into obedient counties, rebellion brewed under the leadership of Lupo II. Charlemagne's march southward in 778, lured by whispers of betrayal within Muslim ranks, seemed destined for glory, but ended in humiliation. Pamplona's walls were razed by retreating Franks, only to face the wrath of the Basques at Roncesvalles Pass, where Roland fell and legends were born in blood. Pamplona, always defiant, became a city passed between hands, attacked, conquered, and ruled by both emirs and lords. Yet in the rugged heart of the Pyrenees, the spirit of the Basques did not bend. Even as Asturias rose in the west and empires clashed above them, the people held the line, fierce, fractured, but never forgotten. Rebellion in the pass, the fall and fury of early Navarre. In the tangled highlands between empires, Navarre was not yet a kingdom, but already a battleground of ambitions. Once a duchy granted fragile freedom by Merovingian kings, Vasconia cracked under the Carolingian fist. When Pepin the Short crushed the rebellion of Lupo II and split the land into puppet counties, the fires of resistance smoldered beneath the soil. Charlemagne, chasing glory, marched south to Zaragoza, but his triumph unraveled in betrayal and retreat. As he tore down Pamplona's walls to weaken its will, the mountains rose against him. At Roncesvalles Pass, Basque warriors struck like ghosts, slaughtering Roland and scattering his men in the mists. The Franks never forgot. The Cordoban emir seized his chance, reclaiming Pamplona and punishing its proud lords. Yet even in submission, names like Velasco and Jimeno whispered of power not yet lost. The land stretched to the Ebro, its western edge now eyed by Asturias. But in the heart of Navarre, blood, betrayal, and defiance would forge a future no empire could command. Inigo Arista, the rebel crown of the mountains. In the wild folds of the Pyrenees, where empires clashed and blood paid the price of diplomacy, a chieftain rose, not crowned in gold, but in grit. Inigo Arista, born of two worlds, Basque and Muslim, stepped from the shadows of Cordoba's grasp and was hailed in 824 as the first king of Pamplona. But his was a crown of compromise. While the city bowed in taxes to the emir, it stayed defiantly Christian, its heart beating with rebellion. Arab scribes called him no king, only a lord of the barbarians, a reminder of his tether to Cordoba's leash. Yet Inigo, with his brother foe Musa ibn Musa, dared to revolt. Their alliance faltered, and Inigo died in defiance, his people still unbroken. His son, Garcia Iniguez, played the long game, alliances in the north, skirmishes in the south, always walking the knife's edge between vassal and rebel. Then came Fortune Garces, imprisoned for decades, returned to rule as little more than Cordoba's shadow. But the tide was turning. The fire in the eastern valleys would rise, sweeping away submission. No more half-loyalty, no more tribute. Pamplona would no longer whisper in the language of compromise. It would roar, a kingdom carved by resistance, no longer a pawn but a power. Jimenez ascendancy, the rise of Navarre's warrior kings. In 905, the echoes of rebellion gave way to conquest. Sancho Garces I seized the crown from the faltering Fortune Garces and cast off the emirate of Córdoba's shadow. No longer a vassal, the kingdom of Pamplona roared into history as a force to be reckoned with. Sancho slashed south, claiming the fertile lands of Nájera and Calahorra, toppling the once mighty Banu Qasi. Córdoba struck back, twice. At the Battle of Valdejuncura, Pamplona bled, and by 924, the enemy thundered at its gates. Yet diplomacy proved as potent as the sword. Sancho's daughter, Sancha, married the king of Leon, tying Pamplona to Iberia's Christian heart. By the end of his reign, Sancho had pushed the kingdom's borders west to Alava and Castile, and east through the Aragon and Gallego valleys, 15,000 square kilometers of proud sovereignty. His brother, Jimeno Garces, reigned briefly, only to hand power to the boy king Garcia Sanchez I. But it was not Garcia who ruled. His mother, Queen Toda Aznarez, became the Iron Matriarch of Navarre. With strategic marriages, she wove a web linking Pamplona to Leon, Castile, Alava, Aragon, and even Bigorre. Yet even her political mastery couldn't stem the tide forever. In 934, Garcia Sanchez I turned to his southern enemy, inviting Abd Arrahman III into Pamplona to free himself from his mother's grip. The price? Submission. For years, Pamplona again bowed to Córdoba. Sancho II Abarca, his successor, raised the flag of pride once more. He used his rule to push the kingdom's boundaries and even coined the title King of Navarre. But he could not halt the tide of Almanzor, the hammer of Al-Andalus. The mighty Muslim general scorched Pamplona's lands in 9 brutal raids, taking Calahorra and even demanding royal hostages. In 1000, Garcia Sanchez II, Sancho's heir, fell under the sword of Córdoba's fury. The city of Pamplona itself was razed. Yet from this smoldering ruin rose a boy, Sancho Garces III, barely 8, destined to be El Mayor, the Great. In his early years, he ruled under the guidance of his mother, Jimena Fernandez. But as the caliphate began to crumble after Almanzor's death, Sancho III turned weakness into opportunity. Marriages tied him to Castile, while his armies reached deep into the territories of the Taifa of Zaragoza, Lori, Funes, Uncastillo, and beyond. Sancho the Great, the king who ruled the north. In a time when kingdoms cracked like dry earth under the weight of ambition, one man, Sancho III of Pamplona, rose to mold chaos into empire. His marriage to Muniadona of Castile wasn't just a union. It was a pact to reshape Iberia's future. With quiet calculation and roaring campaigns, Sancho expanded Pamplona's reach across 15,000 square kilometers of mountains, rivers, and blood-soaked valleys. When treachery struck Castile and Count Garcia Sanchez was slain, Sancho placed his own son in the power vacuum. He did not stop there. He bent Gascony to his will, invaded Leon, and sent its king fleeing into the shadows. From Galicia in the west to the gates of Barcelona in the east, Sancho ruled the north like a shadow king. But power's final whisper is always division. In 1035, on his deathbed, Sancho shattered his mighty realm between his sons, birthing kingdoms but sowing future strife. And as he wielded swords in one hand, he lifted crosses in the other, reviving lost bishoprics, restoring holy sees, and reforming the faith from the quiet walls of Lair. Sancho the Great didn't just rule a kingdom. He became the architect of northern Spain's destiny. The dismembered crown, Navarre's fall into fracture. When Sancho the Great died, he left behind not just a mighty kingdom, but a ticking time bomb. His grand realm, stretching from the Pyrenees to the Ebro, from Bayonne to Burgos, was carved up like inheritance at a feuding funeral. For sons received slices of the crown, and unity shattered like stained glass under a hammer. Garcia Sanchez III inherited the throne of Pamplona, but bloodlines turned battlefield as he clashed with his own brother Ferdinand, who, after slaying his rival in the Battle of Atapuerca, seized prized lands and rose as King of Leon and Castile. Garcia's heir, Sancho IV, inherited little more than enemies. Betrayed by his own kin and assassinated in 1076, Navarre crumbled further, with its noble families inviting outsiders to pick at its remains. Alfonso VI of Leon took key territories, while Aragon's Sancho Ramirez claimed the royal seat, reducing Navarre to a shadow of its former glory. Yet through fire and sword, Alfonso the Battler reclaimed glory, taking Zaragoza, reclaiming Buriba, and pushing back the Moors to the Ebro. Even so, what once was a mighty singular crown had become a realm of splinters, each shard gleaming with past power, but never again whole. The last roar of the mountain lion. Navarre, the once proud mountain kingdom, stood on the edge of a blade after Alfonso the Battler's death in 1134, willed not to kin, but to warrior monks. The nobles refused. From their defiance rose Garcia Ramirez, the restorer, claiming the crown with the blood of El Cid in his veins. He and his brilliant successor, Sancho the Wise, built a fortress of culture and law, issuing charters, defying defeat, and daring to dream of a united Navarre. But Castile's gaze burned westward, hungry for coastlines and control. Marriages were made, treaties broken, and territories lost. Not by battle alone, but by betrayal and siege. Sancho the Strong, last lion of the ancient line, fought fiercely and even marched to Las Navas de Tolosa to strike a blow against the Moors. Yet, while he chased allies in North Africa, Castile bled Navarre dry. By 1200, the West was gone, swallowed whole by Castile's ambition. When Sancho died, childless and broken, the crown passed through his sister's blood to the House of Champagne. The kingdom lived on, but its roar had quieted to a whisper, echoing through valleys it no longer ruled. From troubadours to tyrants, the crown in twilight. In the golden echo of the troubadours, Theobald I ushered in an age of verse and velvet peace, where Navarre's court pulsed with Champagne's poetic soul. But harmony was fragile. His heirs carried the crown across seas and battlefields, Theobald II dying on crusade, Henry I ruling briefly, and young Joan I, too tender to wield power, sought refuge in France. A marriage to Philip IV bound Navarre to the French crown, and with it came the silent grip of foreign rule, sealed by blood and force in the brutal War of the Navarrese. For half a century, Navarre and France were one in name, until Queen Joanna II, choosing autonomy over ambition, renounced the French crown for lands and peace. Yet darkness crept in again. Charles II, the Bad, ruled with cunning and cruelty, drawing Navarre into the maelstrom of the 100 Years' War. And then a flicker of light. His son, Charles III the Noble, brought peace and prosperity back to the valleys. But fate, ever fickle, left him without a male heir, and the crown passed once more to a woman, Blanche I, and her husband John II. In Navarre, history never slept. It sang, it bled, it turned endlessly like the Pyrenean winds. The last roar of Navarre, a kingdom in chains. Navarre's twilight came not in a storm, but in a slow, relentless squeeze, its crown caught between ambition and betrayal. Ferdinand the Catholic, eyes fixed on the Pyrenees, plotted and pried, courting papal power and stoking civil divides. When Navarre dared defy his call for war against France, he struck, cloaking conquest in the guise of holy war. In 1512, Castilian forces surged through Pamplona's gates while King John III fled north, leaving Navarre to burn beneath its own divided loyalties. Though the crown resisted, fiercely, desperately, the tides were against them. Even after bold attempts to reclaim their land in 1516 and again in 1521, when a hopeful rebellion nearly toppled Castile's grip, defeat came at Noen. Navarre's last, best chance shattered in a field of broken dreams. What remained was a land promised protection under its own laws, but soon darkened by the Inquisition's shadow and the silence of exiled faiths. The roar of the kingdom was quieted, but not forgotten. North of the Pyrenees, the last flame of independent Navarre. Even as southern Navarre fell under Castile's boot, a flicker of sovereignty survived beyond the Pyrenees. In the lush valleys of Lower Navarre and Béarn, the royal flame endured. From Queen Jeanne III's bold conversion to Calvinism, proclaiming it the state religion and commissioning the first Basque New Testament, to her son Henry III's rise as the Huguenot hero of France's religious wars, northern Navarre stood defiant, unique, and fiercely independent. In 1589, when Henry became King Henry IV of France, the crowns of France and Navarre were united, yet Navarre retained its separate identity. For a time, Pau echoed with the voices of Navarre's parliament, a final echo of freedom. But by 1620, under Louis XIII, the land was absorbed into France proper. Still, the title King of Navarre lingered like a ghost, clinging to French and Spanish monarchs alike, a relic of a divided yet proud kingdom. Even on the eve of revolution in 1789, Navarre's representatives rose to defend their uniqueness against the leveling tide of French centralization. Navarre may have been split, absorbed, and reborn in titles, but its legacy, etched in rebellion, language, and law, remained unbroken north of the mountains. The crown and the kingdom. Navarre's fight for constitutional identity. Navarre was never a passive province. It was a kingdom with its own soul. From its medieval beginnings, Navarre was structured through merindades, governed by merinos, ensuring the king's presence across the land. But power wasn't absolute. The king needed money, and money needed consent. Thus emerged the Cortes of Navarre, a true constitutional assembly with churchmen, nobles, and burgesses, each with equal say. Unlike other realms, no law passed unless each order agreed, giving the people real leverage. Navarre held fiercely to its autonomy, maintaining its Cortes, royal council, supreme court, and Deputation del Reino long after other kingdoms were centralized by the Spanish crown. Even custom houses on the French border were resisted successfully well into the 18th century. The viceroy in Pamplona represented Madrid, but Navarre made it clear it was not just another province. As Spain lurched into modernity, Navarre found itself at odds with absolutist centralism. Prime Minister Manuel Godoy and later liberal reformers sought to erase the fueros, the legal foundations of Navarrese identity. Napoleon's invasion and the turbulence of the Peninsular War crushed liberal hopes and deepened internal divisions. Out of the forests and hills, guerrillas rose, precursors to the Carlist militias, mixing deep Catholicism and fueros-driven nationalism. The death blow came in 1833, when Navarre was officially reduced to a Spanish province. But the resistance never truly died. In 1841, the Ley Pachinada, Compromise Act, tried to soften the blow. Navarre would lose its kingdom, but retain special tax and administrative privileges. It was not a submission, but a negotiated surrender, framed as a pact between equals. Thus, Navarre's history is not one of quiet submission but of constitutional defiance, of legal tradition clashing with empire, and of a people who never stopped fighting to remain a kingdom within a kingdom. The kingdom that would not die. Navarre, once a proud kingdom carved between mountains and history, was stripped of its crown in the 1800s, but never of its soul. Though rebranded a mere province after the treaties of 1839 to 1841, it became a battleground of memory and identity. Factions rose, wars raged, and the Third Carlist War turned its hills into fiery reminders of lost sovereignty. When Spain cracked apart in 1936, Navarre sided with the church and the nationalists, only to be haunted by the brutal purge of thousands of dissenters. Franco rewarded its loyalty with remnants of its ancient liberties, a ghost of the kingdom it once was. And when democracy dawned, Navarre rose again. Not a kingdom, not forgotten, but reimagined as a chartered community, clinging still to the echo of its fueros. Today, split between Spain and France, scattered across provinces, Navarre lives on in its language, in its laws, and in the undying mystery of a land that refused to vanish. So, was Navarre's division justified? Should the Basque country still honor its royal past? Debate below. If you enjoyed this journey through Pyrenean history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Next, we're exploring the Kingdom of Burgundy's dramatic fate on History Love.